Jupiter in Aries 10. A man teaching new forms for old symbols. This is about reviewing old understandings. As we mature, we need to cast off previous models of reality and reinterpret past experiences, seeing them more clearly as metaphors, having deeper meaning than we saw when we were previously absorbed in self-establishment. We are better able and more prepared now to contemplate our feelings as symbolic indicators, rather than to get lost in them. Now, this takes mature wisdom to see emotional dramas as symbolic. They're life lessons, to do with uniqueness in perception and attitudes, and the understanding that knowledge evolves as old ideals are embodied into new experiences. Two major factors that I would say here are that experience turns conceptual theory into knowledge. And if you haven't got the experience, then you really don't know what it is you're talking about. Experience is not theory. That's the whole thing. Metaphorically, we could think of the ideas of Uranus being foisted upon Gaia in mythology and turning out children, which from Uranus's idealistic point of view were unacceptable and needed to die. Experience turns something perfect and ideal into something actually a bit grubby, a bit imperfect, a bit not quite what you want. And this is true of our lives. We all of us go for this job or that relationship or that home, and it's wonderful for a while. The honeymoon period lasts a little while, and then it just loses its glister. It's not gold anymore. And we're disappointed on some level, or we just lose the exhilaration or whatever. But it's the experience of that ideal that changes our rather young, foolish naivety to something approaching mature wisdom. And here in Aries 10, very early on in our game of evolution, we come across the need that there exists for us to check out old teachings, whether these are esoteric symbols or economic models or political proposals that were useful at some point to deal rather imperfectly with a previous problem. Now they're outdated. They're not workable anymore. This applies to everything. That's what modernity gives us. It has to make us let go of that which has become the commonplace. It's not going to be workable anymore, and therefore it's to die. There is no time in human history more poignant than this one upon this very question. All of the economic models that we've used in the past, they don't work anymore, and there are very complex and good reasons for that. We are facing a time of enormous change now, enormous, unimaginable, and it's not yet imagined. That's the whole thing. Nobody's actually come up with something that could work, not really, because of things like the demographic imbalances in the world. So the world is going through a period of accelerated change, and nobody really knows where we're going. There's no leader, there's no visionary, there's no one like Karl Marx or Adam Smith to say this will work. Nobody knows. Nobody can even think about what might work. Now, it's a bit of a stretch to say this also applies to esoteric teachings. Many of the people watching this will be astrologers or interested in astrology, and the way in which we, all of us, have come to understand what astrology is and learn how to use it, all of us have been taking previous commentary from writings that actually were already copies of original thinkers going back 2 generations in many cases. And when you actually sort of try and find out whether astrology and other practices like in Magick and so on, and healing practices, many have been proposed, but not all of them work. Astrology is one of those. There's a lot of people believing certain things are the case in astrology that simply don't check out. They just don't work. What makes them seem to work is nothing more straightforward than confirmation bias. Now, this is also true of religion. It's also true of economic policy, as I've said. It's also true of relationships as well. Lots of the things that we have assumed worked and were true, they actually don't work. Perhaps they never did. We've only just found out. Perhaps they did once, but they don't anymore. And perhaps this is the first time that we've actually had the personal authority to challenge what has been defended by power possessors in the past. The knowledge of certain herbs was known hundreds of years ago, but the women who knew that certain herbs could heal certain things, they were severely persecuted. It behoves us, therefore, to use our own personal experience to inform our own judgment. That's what this symbol is about. And here's Jupiter saying, go for it. Go for it. How can it be worse than what's gone before? Look at the mess we're in now. That's the kind of Jupiter and Aries way of thinking. Why should my idea not be okay? Now, not everybody can access this confidence and actually this sense of responsibility that's not a Saturn sense at all. It's more like a Jupiter sense of responsibility. I can, therefore I must. Only I can do this, therefore I have to do it. That kind of sense of duty to do what you can to expand knowledge and to give it a new spin, your spin, based on your experience. And this would be very different from what has happened before. Most of the teachers that have actually been influential over most of our ideas for most of our lives actually didn't know what they were talking about. Those who did know what they were talking about didn't have the personal experience necessary to validate their theories, which may have been right, but embellished by experience could not have been complete. So here we have the Aries principle of I will do this, trial and error, kind of go for it kind of principle applied to knowledge. And then the encouragement, I think, for all of us is to just say, well, that's what worked for me. And say no more than that, in a sense. I do know about that because that's my personal experience. I've checked out the books that I've read on the topic against my personal experience, and I found that this is how I would like to sort of model the future. This is what works for me. Now, if more of us teachers taught with that in mind, then knowledge would be reclaimed. As it is, knowledge itself, certainly knowledge of the mysteries, is actually in jeopardy. Not actually, ironically, from being lost through persecution, but by being freed up, so that any idiot can put forward an opinion on what's true and what's not. And if they're good looking, sexy, and they have computer skills to get them out on YouTube, then they can speak. And if they're the best at all of those unrelated topics, they will be seen as the authority of the future. Nothing to do with truth or experience. Now, this is something that we have to be careful about. Those of us who are actually interested in discovering our own personal take on the meaning of life and the truth of spirituality and what that really means in practice, we want access to the real wisdom that the ancients had, going back a long time. That means going back to first principles, checking out the things that are said to happen, said to be predictable and must happen, check them out against what actually does happen. Now, perhaps one of the best astrologers I've ever met, Paladin Jenkins, when I first met him, he actually made the statement he'd written more books on astrology than he'd read, because he'd only read one book, and he'd written two. And what he did was just study today's transits and notice what happened to him over a very long period of time, meticulously. He was a Virgo, Saturn in Virgo. He did it very cleverly. And he saw that some of the teachings of astrology worked for him. Some of them didn't work for him, but might work for other people. Some of the things that are taught in astrology just it's nonsense. And I would say that the majority of it becomes nonsense because of one factor that is very, very rarely taught, and that is the relative importance of things. If you're looking at a horoscope, for example, some things stick out as important, other things are there and sexy if you know them to talk about them, but they're actually bordering on meaningless. I don't say they are exactly meaningless, but they're just so inconsequential in any real sense of that person's life and what they can actually focus on. It's better not to speak about it. And I would include fixed stars and asteroids mostly in that. It depends what you're looking for. I've certainly validated asteroids a little bit. But the point is that the transits of the outer planets to the lights, that gives you all the information you need to discuss what the client wants to discuss right now, right here, in the most cases. That's the truth of it. So what I'm saying really is that if you are learning astrology, studying it for yourself for your own purposes, or becoming an astrologer, then be aware and beware that relative importance is an aspect of astrology not much understood, not much taught, not much studied, therefore. You have to work out for yourself in your own personal experience whether this, that, or the other works for you. Now, some things are different for some people. Some people make the nodes very important indeed. Some disregard them. Some make retrogradation really important. Some people disregard that. People who are really studying the feminine mysteries more, they would celebrate the asteroids a bit. And those who are very, very tuned in on a Neptunian subtle level, maybe they can use the fixed stars to great purpose. However, I still claim the fact that when there's a tsunami coming, then you're not worried about local streams and so on, because you're going to be awash with the tsunami. Well, that's what a Pluto transit is to your sun or moon. You don't care about anything else when that's going on. Probably true for the angles as well. So if I see a client who's having one of those, that's what I focus on, and I exclude everything else. Now, I'm not really introducing new knowledge when I'm doing this in my astrology. I'm just giving more importance to what my experience tells me deserves more importance. I'm using my own personal experience to speak my own personal truth. And if you imagine that anyone else is ever doing anything else, then I'm going to disagree with you. Whatever you're told is a personal spin that comes from that person's approach to the subject, their own experience and so on. It is not universal, it is not truth, because those two things don't exist, despite the teachings that come through astrology and everything, actually. People say this is the case, and it's just not. That's a false statement. Nothing is the same for any two people. It's certainly not the same for the whole of humanity. It can't be that way. So, in summary, I think have courage to speak your own truth and to study very carefully the books that you read against your personal experience. Check it out before you believe in it. Most assuredly, check it out before you go telling other people that it's true, because you simply don't know. That would be foolish, and that would be inappropriate.